Abel's blood had barely dried on the ground when the Bible suddenly whispers of a mystery. Cain had a wife. But who was she? The woman who bound her life to the first murderer, the cursed wanderer of the earth. Hidden in the shadows of Genesis, her story is almost forgotten, yet without her the future of mankind could not continue. And once you hear her story, you will never read Genesis the same way again. Subscribe now to Bible Stories Tube so you don't miss this powerful journey into one of Scripture's most mysterious figures. The sky was heavy with silence. Abel's blood still cried out from the ground, though his voice was gone forever. Cain stood alone, trembling under the weight of judgment. His hands were stained with his brother's life, and his heart was shattered by God's words. "Cursed are you, a fugitive and a wanderer you shall be on the earth." The earth itself had turned against him. The soil that once opened to receive Abel's blood would no longer yield its strength for Cain. Every field he touched would wither. Every seed he planted would resist him. He was marked, not only by guilt, but by God's own hand. And yet, God had shown him mercy. Whoever kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. No one could touch him. No one could end his wandering. Cain was trapped in a life that felt worse than death, carrying a curse, carrying a mark, carrying memories he could never erase. He turned away from his family, away from Adam and Eve, away from the only home he had ever known. The gates of Eden still burned with the memory of the flaming sword, but now Cain too was cut off. Not just from paradise but from peace. And then, Genesis tells us something that stops the reader cold. Then Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. Where did she come from? Who would bind her life to Cain, the murderer of Abel, the cursed wanderer of the earth? The answer hides in the pages that many skip past. Genesis 5 verse 4 whispers it softly. Adam had other sons and daughters. There it is. Unseen, unnamed, almost forgotten. A daughter of Adam and Eve. She had lived in the shadows of her famous brothers. She grew up hearing the stories of the garden, the paradise her parents lost. She had never seen Eden's beauty, but she had felt its absence in every sigh of her mother, in every tear of her father. She had also seen death. She had wept over Abel, the innocent brother whose blood stained the ground. She had watched her family torn apart by violence. And now, God's judgment had fallen on Cain. Yet she became his wife. Can you feel the weight of that? The forgotten daughter of Adam and Eve, carrying the shame of her family, now linked forever with the man who destroyed it. What was it like for her? Did she resist, her heart trembling with fear, as her hand was given to Cain? Did she whisper Abel's name when she was alone, remembering the brother she had lost? Or did she pity Cain, the cursed man who bore a mark no one could remove? The Bible is silent, and yet the silence speaks volumes. Because her story is hidden, it forces us to imagine her footsteps, walking beside Cain as he left the land of his parents. Feeling the tension in every glance from her family, knowing they saw her as the wife of the murderer. Wondering if God would judge her too, for standing with Cain. Every moment carried suspense. Every breath was heavy with fear. And still, God allowed life to grow from her womb. This unnamed daughter, unseen by history, became the mother of Cain's child. From her body came the first grandson of Adam and Eve. Her womb carried the future of Cain's line. Cities would one day rise from her son. Generations would trace their roots back to her. Yet she remains hidden. The Bible doesn't record her name, because her story isn't about glory. It's about mystery. It's about what happens when sin enters the world, when choices ripple across generations, when even the innocent are caught in the storm. Think of it. She had the same parents as Abel, the one whose offering pleased God. She had the same parents as Cain, the one cursed for shedding blood. She stood in between. One brother dead, One brother cursed, and she, the forgotten daughter, became the bridge between them. That is where the suspense lies. Because her life was tied not to Eden's beauty, not to Abel's righteousness, but to Cain's curse. And yet, without her, the story of humanity would be incomplete. Genesis does not waste words. If Cain's wife is mentioned, it is because she matters. She is the silent witness that life continued, even after death. She is the hidden proof that God's plan for humanity did not stop, even in the ashes of tragedy. She is the reminder that even in judgment, God allows mercy to break through. Cain's wife was not a queen, not a prophetess, not even named. She was a daughter, a sister, a wife, a mother. She was forgotten by history, but not by God. Her quiet presence carried the story forward. And now, centuries later, her silence still calls out. It asks us, what do we do when we are tied to brokenness? How do we live when our lives are shaped by the sins of others? Can God still bring hope out of pain and life out of sorrow? The forgotten daughter of Adam and Eve is proof that the answer is yes. Because even in the shadow of murder, even in the wake of judgment, God allowed her to give birth to a future. Cain wandered east of Eden, carrying the weight of God's curse. The mark was still upon him, the silent reminder of his crime. His steps were heavy, but he was not alone. At his side walked the forgotten daughter, his wife, bound to his fate. The Bible tells us that far from his family, Cain built a city. But before walls of stone were raised, before his name was carved into the earth, there was a child. The scripture says, "And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch." A child, a son, a spark of new life in the middle of judgment. What must that have felt like for her, the mother of Cain's child? To carry within her body not only blood, but history. To feel life kicking against her ribs while she still mourned Abel, her own brother. Every movement in her womb was a reminder. The story was not over. God had not allowed Cain's line to end in blood. But the question lingered in the shadows. What kind of future would this child inherit? Would he bear the curse of his father? Would the mark of sin cling to him? Or could he escape the shadow that followed Cain? The Bible doesn't answer directly, but it gives us clues. This child was named Enoch, and Cain, who was cursed to wander, did something unexpected. He built a city and named it after his son. A city in the name of Enoch. For a man condemned to be a fugitive, it was almost an act of defiance. A city was permanence. A city was a place to belong. A city was roots in the soil that had once rejected him. And behind it all was his wife, the unnamed woman who bore the son that Cain honored with the foundation of a city. Her womb had carried the future. Her hidden story became the seed of civilizations. But imagine her heart. Did she rejoice when she held her son for the first time, or did she tremble? Did she see Abel's eyes in the baby's face, or Cain's? Did she cradle him in hope or in fear? She had walked through blood and curse, and now she was called to nurture life in a world already poisoned by sin. The suspense deepens here, because the Bible makes it clear, from Cain's line came both culture and corruption. His descendants were inventors, builders, and artists. They made instruments of music, tools of bronze, and tents for herds. But they were also the line that grew far from God, the line that walked deeper into rebellion. And it all began with her. With the forgotten daughter. With the wife of Cain. With the mother of Enoch. Her role may be hidden, but her influence cannot be erased. Through her, Cain's name lived on. Through her, cities were founded. Through her, humanity spread across the earth. She is the silent foundation beneath the history of nations. But her silence is not empty. It carries emotion. She lived between the lines of Scripture, unseen yet essential. She was the thread that bound Cain's curse to the continuation of mankind. She was the bridge between Adam and the generations that followed. Think of the weight of that calling. Without her, there would have been no Enoch, no city, no descendants of Cain. Without her, the line of humanity would have looked very different. She bore the burden of carrying the future, even when the past was filled with tragedy. And here lies the fascination. The Bible never wastes words. When it says Adam had sons and daughters, when it records Cain's wife, it leaves a door open. It allows us to see that history was not written only by the famous names. It was also carried by the silent ones, by the unnamed, by those who lived in shadows, yet whose lives shaped the world. The forgotten daughter teaches us this. Sometimes the most powerful stories are not shouted, but whispered. Sometimes the most important people are not remembered by name, but by the life they carried forward. She reminds us that sin leaves scars that ripple through families. She married a murderer. She bore a child in exile. She raised a son in the shadow of judgment. Yet her story does not end in despair. It ends with life, with continuation, with proof that even in the ashes of failure, God's purpose cannot be stopped. Because this is what Genesis wants us to see. After Abel's blood cried out, after Cain was marked and cursed, the story did not collapse. God still allowed humanity to grow. God still allowed life to bloom where death had reigned. And the forgotten daughter was the vessel of that mercy. She is the echo of hope in the middle of Cain's darkness. She is the reminder that God's plan is bigger than man's failure. Though we do not know her name, her story still speaks. It tells us that no curse is strong enough to cancel God's promise that humanity would fill the earth. It tells us that no failure, not even Cain's murder, could silence the future God had written. So the next time you read Genesis and see the words, Cain knew his wife, pause. Remember her. Remember the silent daughter of Adam and Eve. Remember the woman whose life was entangled with sin, but whose womb still carried a future. She is more than a forgotten name. She is the proof that God writes history not only with the famous, but with the hidden. Not only with the righteous, but even with those who walk in the shadows. The mother of Cain's child. The mother of Enoch. The mother whose story whispers from the very first pages of Scripture. And through her silence, God speaks. For in her hidden life we see a mystery, a warning, and above all a hope. Even in exile, even in judgment, God allows life to rise again. The forgotten daughter's silence still speaks, a reminder that even in judgment, God's mercy continues. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, share it with others, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Together, let's keep uncovering the hidden mysteries of the Bible.